Oh, maybe she is an AI bot.
Sure.
So a guest, that's nice to have a guest. So let me just begin by sharing my screen. Make sure I got the right one. That look like the right one?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I've been a photographer for, boy, now 57 years, I think. And I originally called this presentation uh, The Lessons I've Learned in 55 Years of Photography, but I've just changed it to The Lessons My Images Have Taught Me, because there's been some key images that have taught me some very important lessons. Now, before we get started, I have noticed a lot of my friends, like John Barclay, like to be introduced as award winning photographers. And so I just wanted to let you know that I too have won awards, and I want to take a minute to impress you with some of my awards. This first one, I won first place in the three-legged race in the sixth grade. Very proud of that award. It wasn't a solo effort. I did have other people helping. This was a participant award I won for in the third grade for a spelling bee. And this last one I'm very proud of. I was once declared the good boy in kindergarten. So I too have won awards. Now I'm going to borrow a thought from Rick Rubin. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He was a great music producer, and he wrote the book, The Creative Act. And this is his thought. Nothing in this presentation is known to be true. These are my experiences and my lessons. Some ideas may resonate and others may not. A few may awaken an inner knowing you forgot you had. Use what's helpful, let go of the rest. So I'm going to talk about the most significant image. That's what I call it, my most significant image, the angel Gabriel. I was out at the Newport Beach Pier in Southern California, and I was photographing. It was a crowded day. Imagine there are dozens of people walking past me, but I'm using a long exposure and they disappear. And I liked the setting. I loved how the horizon bisected the image. I love the converging lines, but I realized it was missing a subject. And so I looked around for someone I could ask to stand in my image. And I saw the angel Gabriel. His name was Gabriel Stan. And he was a homeless man who had just reached into a trash can and pulled out some uneaten French fries and was eating them. And I approached him and asked if he would stand in my photograph. I'd be happy to take him to lunch. And he reluctantly agreed. And he wanted to hold his Bible. And because his name was Gabriel, I called it the angel Gabriel. And what makes this the most significant image of mine is it was the very first time that I consciously could see the final image in my mind's eye, in my vision, as I call it. And that became a roadmap that allowed me to both shoot it a certain way and then process it. Afterwards, after taking this image, I took Gabriel to a very nice restaurant. And imagine walking in with a homeless man who is filthy, barefooted, matted hair. And as we sat and looked at the menu, I said to Gabriel, order anything that you like. And he said, I'd love a steak with mushrooms and onions. I haven't had one in years. And when the waitress brought the steak, he picked it up with his hands and ate it. He was a delightful fellow. He had been a drug addict, but was now clean. And it turned out he was Romanian. He and his father had escaped Romania during the reign of Ceausescu. And I'm Romanian. So we had that immediate bond. As we were getting ready to part ways, I learned that his father lived nearby in San Dimas. And I said, Gabriel, give me your father's name and address. And if I sell any of these images, I'd be happy to share a portion with you. To which he replied, give it to someone who can really use it. I have everything that I need. And Gabriel walked away with his only two possessions, that Bible and his bedroll. I go back to the Newport Beach Pier every year, several times, and always go back looking for Gabriel, but have never seen him since. So one of the lessons I learned from this experience was that finding and following my vision changed just not my photography, But it actually changed my life as I began to understand that vision had little to do with photography. It's how I see myself in the world. Let me give you a background story to put this into perspective. When I was a boy, I picked up photography when I was 14. Ansel Adams was the man. Uh, if you were a photographer, he was the guy you looked up to and you tried to be like. And I would try to be like him in how I made my images look. And I'd even go to Yosemite and I would try to learn where he stood for his famous images, and I would try to recreate them. There was no greater compliment that anyone could give me than to look at one of my images and say, that reminds me of an Ansel Adams. And I'd beam with pride. Well, a few years later, I went to review Santa Fe. That's where you take your work and you show it to experts in the field with the hopes of being discovered. And I was certain I was going to be discovered and declared the next Ansel Adams. I got to the very last reviewer of a very long day, and I showed him my work. He looked at it ever so briefly. Then he brusquely pushed it back to me and said, "It looks like you're trying to copy Ansel Adams." And I said proudly, "I am. I love Ansel Adams." And he then said something that was going to change my life forever. He said, "Ansel already did Ansel. What can you do that exhibits your unique vision?" Talk about a violent epiphany. It suddenly occurred to me, was it really my life's ambition to become known as the world's greatest Ansel Adams imitator? Or did I have something to say of my own? And that set me forth on a 2-year journey to find out, what was this vision he spoke of? And more importantly, did I have one? So vision, what is it? Is it a style that you develop? Is it a look or a technique you apply to your images? Is it a creative talent that you're born with? Is it something that some people have and others do not? Well, it turns out that it's none of those things. Vision is simply the sum total of your life experiences that allows you to see the world in a unique way. We've all lived such different lives and had different experiences, and that shapes our vision. Or put more simply, it is simply how I see uniquely. When I don't listen to all the other voices out there telling me how I ought to see and photograph. Now, I remember people trying to explain vision to me with words, and I never could grasp it. It was this wispy concept that I just couldn't understand. So I'd like to show you what vision looks like by showing you what the eye sees versus what my vision saw, the before and after image. What I see with my eyes is different than what I see through my vision. It's the difference between documenting versus creating, putting part of me into the image. What I see with my eyes can grab my attention, but then my vision takes over. And often, what I see through my vision is quite different than what I saw with my eyes. Some may look at my before and after images and conclude it's the processing. That's what made this image. But I assure you, it's not the processing. Anybody can learn processing. It's the vision that drives the processing. Why is vision so important? Because it's the difference between an average image and a uniquely you image. Another lesson learned from the angel Gabriel. I was so excited. I had finally understood what vision is. I saw it, I created it, and I took this image and I showed it to my mentor. I was so proud of it. First words out of her mouth: "Don't center the subject, Cole. I'm always telling you that. Don't center the subject." And I'm in a quandary because my vision said one thing and my mentor said another. So I went home and tried cropping it differently and hated it. She may have seen it that way, but it was my vision and my image. And this was a great lesson to learn. There are no experts when it comes to my vision. I need to trust myself, even if everyone else in the room says, no, it would look better this way. Other people's opinion, it's just noise.
Mhm.
And yet, another lesson learned from this encounter with Gabriel. Prior to meeting the angel Gabriel, I had never met or interacted with a homeless person. Yet, despite my complete lack of experience and knowledge, I thought I knew what caused homelessness, drugs, and laziness, and what the cure was: get a job and get off drugs. Since that experience with Gabriel, my wife and I have worked quite a bit with the homeless community in our town. And what I've learned, I know nothing because I have not walked in their shoes. I might think that I might have reacted differently or taken a different path, but I don't know if I had been placed in those people's position, how I would have turned out. I can't judge. I've not walked in their shoes. Windmill and moonlight. Okay, here's the setting. I'm driving, it's after midnight. I'm driving south through Nebraska. I've got an hour to go before I finally get to a hotel room and a meal. It had just snowed, they've plowed the roads, the sky is cleared, and it's below zero. When I pass this site, and my heart kind of takes a double beat. And I begin that internal argument with myself. Don't stop. You're cold. You're tired. Stop, stop, stop. You can just get this another time. There's never another time. How does a nice meal and a warm bed sound? You'll regret it. Stop now. And so what do you think I did? I drove past it. And then I'm down the road about 15 minutes, and I remember I had made a commitment to myself that when I saw something, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how late I would be, I have to stop. And so I turned around, and I had to make 3 or 4 passes because the roads had been plowed and there's no turnoff. Finally, I found a spot where I could turn off. It's about a mile south of this location. So I'm traipsing through knee-deep snow to get to this spot. When I got there, it was so cold, my battery had died, and I would have to warm it in my pocket for a few minutes before I could get another shot out of it. Despite all of that, I got this. And the lesson I relearned: always stop when something catches my eye. I tell myself, oh, I'll come back tomorrow, I'll come back next week, but the chances are I won't. And the chances are that the conditions will have changed. And even more importantly, how I think and see and feel will have changed, which leads me to another lesson, a related lesson: ceiling lamps. I was in a hotel lobby in Akron, Ohio, when I just happened to look up at the ceiling and saw this ceiling lamp. And for whatever reason, it really caught my attention. And so I pushed the table out of the lobby and I laid on the floor and I just looked at that lamp. And then I photographed it. And I loved the look. And I kind of got hooked on this. And wherever I would go, I would look up at the ceiling and find these unique ceiling lamps and photograph them from straight below. And just had a blast. I was really passionate about the project. It was a fun project. And I started combining the images and just had fun with it. Well, fast forward 3 years. I'm back in Akron, Ohio. I purposely book a room in that same hotel because I wanted to see the ceiling lamp that started the project. I walked into the lobby. I looked up, I saw it, and I thought, I don't get it. It didn't strike me the same way. And if I had seen it for the first time 3 years later, it never would have inspired that project. So what I've learned is when I feel it, I must act right then because I may not feel it later. I don't know why my muse comes and goes, but it does. And when it speaks, I must listen right then. Harbinger. This is my favorite portfolio. I was on a father and son outing on a hot July day. I'm out with my son, number 4, Jem, and we're on I-70, just entering Utah, when I see these great mud hills, dark, dark mud with not a blade of grass growing on them. So it's over 100 degrees, and we hike up to these mud hills, and I spent some time photographing them. But it just, it was a good setting again, but it didn't have a subject. So we went back to the truck. And as I got back, I just look over my shoulder, look back at those mud hills, and I see this little white cloud moving quickly across the sky. And I could see that in a minute, it was going to be over those 2 mud hills that I had been photographing. So Jem and I ran back up. We get the tripod set up, we get the camera set up, and I get off the one shot. And I always name my images the first words that come to mind. And it was harbinger, which means an omen of things to come. And I loved that image, and others loved it. And they would ask me if I was going to do a portfolio. And I would just chuckle, thinking, what are the chances of finding these clouds? But when you're passionate about something, you're always on the lookout. And over the years, I've been able to find many, many harbingers all over the world. And in a minute, I'll talk about this one and why I almost missed it. And so what I've learned is that when you're passionate about a subject, it gives you great power. It gives you great enthusiasm. It gives you great strength. When I'm passionate about a project, I can do anything. Well, almost anything. And now, this is kind of a sad lesson learned, because it took me so many years to figure this one out. I was in the San Francisco area when I took my first power line image back in 2004, I think. And I happened to show it to a friend of mine who has an MFA, and he taught photography. And he convinced me that this would not be an appropriate project for a fine art project because it was hard mannered and man-made. And I listened to him. And it was about 5 years later, I created my next power line image that I remembered the words of Russ in my head, not an appropriate subject for a fine art project. But over the years, I always found myself drawn to these power lines for whatever reason. And then COVID hit, and I found myself wandering in the wilderness to avoid people. And guess what I was always attracted to? And then I suddenly realized, if I am that passionate about this subject, it is the perfect project, regardless of what somebody else calls it. Lesson learned, if I'm drawn to a subject, I must pursue it. I must create what I love, no matter what it's called or what other people think of it. They walk among us. I've been working for about, probably close to 30 years on a project called Monoliths. And it's primarily shot along the Oregon coast. And I would go there every September. It was a great time to photograph because September, the kids are back in school, the weather's changing. It's just a great time to photograph. Well, this year, every single day, I'm there for a month, every day it's raining so hard I can't photograph because it's just hitting the lens. And I was getting rather discouraged. So I decided to drive up to Cannon Beach. It was far enough away, I thought maybe the weather conditions were better. And sure enough, they were. It was beautiful skies, perfect conditions. I get my camera out to do my first shot, and immediately the fog rolls in. And that was the only shot I got. And then I was completely engulfed in fog. And I remember just being so discouraged. And I just kind of shook my hands at the weather gods and say, damn you, I give up. I was going to go buy a big steak, rent a movie, and I was just going to chill. I was giving up. And as I'm walking back to my car down the beach, I thought to myself, wait a minute, I came here with expectations. I wanted to have blue skies with fluffy clouds moving for long exposures. I had expectations. But what else is being presented to me? And as I look up, I see this group of people walking down towards me on the beach. And I used a long exposure and I called the image, "They walk among us." And it taught me an important lesson. Be open to what's being presented. Sometimes I am on a mission and I want certain conditions, but that shouldn't blind me to what else is there. And this is a related lesson. I'm at Tongariki on Easter Island, and I was photographing. This is the largest ahu with the most standing moi. And there was a group of tourists in front of me. And I was kind of perturbed because I want them to leave. I don't want to be rude and yell out, "Hey, get out of my way. I'm taking a shot." So I'm waiting. And I think I'm playing solitaire, not paying attention to what else is around me. And I just happened to look up and I see this harbinger and I just barely got it. And I thought, oh my gosh, what if I had missed this shot? And then I thought to myself, what else have I missed because I'm looking down at my phone? And so today, as I'm out doing 4-minute exposures, my go-to to spend 4 minutes is to get my phone and look at the phone. Then I remember my lesson. What else have I missed? So the lesson learned, I can't be open to what's being presented if I'm looking down at my phone. Melting giants. A few years ago, I overheard two men talking about these great icebergs that came along the coast of Newfoundland. And that was all I needed to hear. That piqued my interest. And off I went on a 1-month, 9,000-mile journey. Now, I never make preparations when I go to a new location. I never get a guidebook. I never look at other people's work. I go with a blank slate. But let's face it, we've all seen pictures of the icebergs, the gorgeous deep blues and the beautiful skies. So I had an idea of what I might see. And when I got there, that is in fact what I saw with my eyes. But that is not what I saw through my vision. What I saw through my vision was a completely different story. It was one of sadness because these icebergs live such a short life. They're birthed in Greenland and spend 9 to 12 months circling in the ocean until they come along the coast of Newfoundland. There, they break apart into smaller pieces, run aground, and then rocking in the surf, they break apart and melt on shore. And that just seems so sad to me. And so I created the images in very dark, high contrasty tones. The lesson I learned from this project, see how I see, even if it's different from how others see. See how I see, especially if it's different from how others see. I don't want to create work that looks like everyone else. I follow the advice of the great philosopher Popeye. I am what I am, and that's all that I am. Trees from a train. When I was a young man, I lived in Alaska, but sadly never had returned, never went back to visit old friends, never took my family there on a vacation. And that kind of saddened me. Well, right before COVID hit, I get a call from a friend who says, I've got a 2-for-1 airline ticket deal and I'm headed to Fairbanks. Would you like to join me? Boy, howdy. I didn't know what I was going to photograph, but I had heard about this incredible train ride from Fairbanks to Anchorage, 12 hours through some of the most rugged and isolated parts of Alaska. And on that morning, a snowstorm. And I'm thinking, wow, I've hit the photographic jackpot. Well, the first thing you do when you get on a train is grab a window seat, get the camera, and start looking for something to photograph. Well, it didn't take long to realize this was going to be a lot harder than I thought. I'm basically in a train doing 50 miles per hour through a tunnel of trees in a blinding snowstorm. there wasn't a lot to see except for trees speeding by. So, a little discouraged, I went between the two cars and I opened up both doors. You can do that on this train. Well, you could. Amtrak just bought it, and now you can't open the doors. And I began shooting out each side of the car. After every shot, I'd have to wipe the snowflakes off the lens because they would melt into raindrops. And the only thing to photograph were the trees speeding by. So I began photographing them. Then I started panning as I shot the trees. Then, because I love long exposures, I thought to myself, what would happen if I used a long exposure and I panned with the trees? And the first shot out of camera blew me away. I didn't understand it. It was a swirl, I called it, but I loved it. And for the next 12 hours, I just played trying to understand what I could control and how to change the swirl. Had a blast. And it wasn't until I got home that I fully understood the swirl. It came about because of all these motions combined. The trees going one way, the train going another. The panning was key, but the real key was my shutter. We have a focal plane shutter in our cameras. It's a slit that moves from top to bottom. This top to bottom motion combined with the sideways motions created the swirl. And even though I understand it logically, it is still hard to reconcile this shot. The tree standing still with 360 degrees of swirl. Hard to understand. Lesson learned, don't give up, be inquisitive, play, have fun. Ancient stones. Ancient stones is a project. I anthropomorphize a lot of things. And I always have believed that these ancient stones were living beings, but they moved so slowly that we didn't even notice them moving. And they sat there for centuries watching us humans scurry about full of self-importance. And I do that a lot with my projects, anthropomorphize. Well, I was exhibiting this body of work in Boulder, Colorado. It was opening night, and I was there entertaining guests. When a woman came up and stood next to me, looked at my images, and then said to me, you know, that doesn't follow the rule of thirds. And I looked at her and I was astounded because she couldn't see my images. She could only see rules followed and rules not followed. So in jest, I created Cole's rule of thirds, which states, a great image consists of 1/3 vision, 1/3 the shot, and 1/3 processing. But it's the vision that comes first. And that's what drives the shot and drives the post-processing. For 35 years before I found my vision, I only focused on the shot and the processing. And what I created was just average images that look just like everyone else's images. And so it begs the question, what photographic rules should I follow? Well, my conclusion is none, unless I want to create average images that look just like everyone else's who are following the same rules. Do you remember paint by number? We were promised that if we painted within the line, followed the numbers, we could create a masterpiece. Well, not a masterpiece. The truth is, you don't create a masterpiece by following the numbers or by following the rules. At best, all you'll produce is a crude imitation. Lesson learned. When I'm seeing through the eyes of rules, I'm not seeing for myself. Ukrainians with eyes shut. I have a son, Cody, he's my son number 2, who was serving in the Peace Corps, and he was serving in Ukraine. And so my wife and I went off to visit him. And as is my practice, I made no preparations, no guidebooks, no photographs from other people, just went with a blank slate, hoping and trusting I would see something that would inspire me and I'd come home with a portfolio. But we were there for about 3 days and I haven't seen anything. So I'm starting to panic a little bit and I'm counting down how many days do I have left. And that kind of pressure never helps the creative process. The people are always interesting in a foreign land, but the problem is that they always put on a mask for you, a big smile, and you don't have time to get to know them and break down barriers. And I didn't speak Russian or Ukrainian. So as I was pondering this problem, how to break down these barriers, we were at a bus stop and I see this old guy leaning against the wall. And I walk up to him and I tap my chest and I say, America. And he nods. Hey, Pauline, you might want to mute yourself.
Oh,
Your microphone is kind of making some noise.
thought
And
it
I
was
held up my camera and I said, photographer.
it was on mute.
And he nodded. And then I did the sign for, can I take your photo? And he nodded. And I took his photograph. And then I said, using sign language, stop, close your eyes. And he scrunched his face as if to say, what? And I said it again, close your eyes. And I took his photograph a second time. And it got rid of the camera face. And I liked the effect. I liked what it did. I felt like I was seeing more of the real person. And so for the next 10 days, walking the streets of Ukraine, I stopped people and using sign language, asked if I could photograph them with their eyes shut. A homeless man on the streets of Lviv, a grandfather collecting water from a sacred spring to take home to his ailing wife. Groundskeeper at a monastery that in olden days had over 1,000 monks, but on that day had a single monk left. A Cossack playing for money on the streets of Lviv. And the lesson I learned, be creative when facing a challenge. Figure it out. Another lesson learned. This is Natasha. She lived on the banks of the Dnipro River, right above the dam that the Russians blew up early in the war. And she came home just before Christmas to find that 2 drones had struck her home, destroying everything she owned, including her several animals. She now lives squatting in another abandoned home. And recently she wrote and said their Russians are now dropping little bomblets, colored bomblets that dogs step on and get killed by and children pick up and get maimed. And she wrote and said, if anybody could have told me that I will see dead bodies in the street killed by bombs, I would never believe. Lesson learned. Putin is evil. Lenny, a portrait of breast cancer. Lenny was a customer of mine. She had purchased a print of the angel Gabriel. And about a year later, she called me and said, I've got breast cancer. I've had a mastectomy and I want you to photograph me. And I said, Lenny, I'm so sorry to hear that. But then I went on to explain that I'm really not that type of photographer. And she said, I don't care. I want you to do it. And Lenny, I don't have the right equipment. I've got no experience doing portrait work. She goes, it'll be fine. I want you to do it. I go, Lenny, let me give you the name of a woman I know, and she specializes in this type of photography. She goes, no, I want you to do it. It'll be fine. She just would not let go. So off I went to Grand Junction, Colorado to photograph Lenny. I found Lenny to be beautiful and dignified. She was not only insistent that I take these images, but that I share them with others. She said, good would come from them. But it was an uncomfortable subject, uncomfortable for me, and I couldn't imagine how so for Lenny. I had a vision of how I wanted to portray Lenny. I also had a question that I was dying to ask, but I was afraid to. I was afraid that it would be too personal or that it would ruin the mood of the shoot. So as we got near the end of the shoot, we were standing in her kitchen. I was getting ready to put my camera away when I finally asked her my question. I said, Lenny, this is in June of 2008. I go, Lenny, what is your prognosis? She answered, I'll be dead by Christmas. The good news is that Lenny got into a trial program in Dallas and she survived, and Lenny is still with us to this day. Lesson learned, do things outside my comfort zone. Moy, sitting for portrait. When I was a boy, 17 years old, I read all the Thor Heyerdahl adventure books. And the one that really stuck with me was his book, Aku Aku, his trip to Easter Island. And for most of my life, that stayed in my head. And again, I anthropomorphized these Moy of Easter Island, these giant stone statues. And so a few years ago, my wife and I were creating a bucket list when I just happened to say out loud, I'd love to go to Easter Island, but of course that's impossible. And my wife, not knowing any better, said, why is that impossible? And so off we went. Getting to Easter Island is not easy. They call it the most isolated, inhabited place on earth. We flew from Denver to Toronto to Santiago and then out to Easter Island. And on the long leg of that journey, I fell asleep and had a dream. I dreamt that the Moy were actually living beings. And I had taken a big roll of backdrop paper, two big stands, and set up an outdoor portrait studio. Then I went from Moy to Moy, asking if they would come and sit for a portrait. What I didn't appreciate was that the Moy had been so poorly treated by outsiders in the past that most said no. Some said they were too old or too infirm to make the walk. Even the younger ones said no, they didn't want to run into other Klansmen they had a dispute with. So after issuing the invitations, I wasn't certain if anyone would come. Well, the day and hour came, and at first, no one did come. But then slowly, some of the younger Moy came and sat for a portrait. And as word got out of their positive experience, more and more of the Moy came. Well, I woke up from that dream and I told it to my wife. I thought about it for a bit. Then I said to her, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to invite the Moy to come sit for a portrait. And I did invite them. And they did come. Now, of course, the Moy did not come to me, but rather I would go to them. And I would photograph them under cloud cover. And then I would outline them and drop them onto a digital backdrop I had created, making it look like they sat in a portrait studio. And I photographed them under cloud cover so I could dodge up highlights, making it look like they sat under studio lighting. None of these skills I had possessed, but I had a vision and I know I can learn skills. This was perhaps one of the greatest trips that I've ever taken. This was my favorite Moy. He refused to turn and face the camera. He wanted to show the bullet holes that early explorers had inflicted upon him as they used him for target practice. Lesson learned. My best projects are those where I feel inspired. And I've only really had two projects that I felt inspired. This one and another, The Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau. When I was in Ukraine, we had a couple of extra days and we decided to go next door to Poland, took the train over. And we stayed in Krakow at the city square. And I knew Auschwitz-Birkenau was nearby, but I didn't want to go there. I am an empath. I feel things too strongly. I take on the sad feelings of other people. I don't watch sad movies or read sad books. And I sure didn't want to go to a place called a death camp. But the family outvoted me, and so off we went. We took a tour bus over, and as we drove over, I thought about where I was going. I thought, surely, if there is a sacred place on earth, this must be one of them. And I decided that I would not photograph there. I didn't want to treat it as a tourist location. I didn't want to, be sacrilegious. And so as we got off the bus, I asked the driver if I could leave my gear on board. And he said no, he wouldn't be responsible for it. And so fortunately, I began the tour with my gear in hand. The first thing they do is show you a book. pictures of each person with a description of that person. And as I flipped through those pictures, it was clear that this photographer was skilled and he took pride in his work. And that causes you to wonder, why are they so carefully documenting someone who they will either work to death or murder? Why? Then they take you into the room with the iconic piles that we've all seen. The pile of thousands of glasses, the pile of human hair, used stuffed mattress and pillow, and the one that got to me, the pile of human bridge work yanked from the mouths of the dead. Now, I'm not claustrophobic, but in that moment, I could not breathe in that room. And I signaled to my family that they should continue the tour. And I was going outside to catch my breath. Once outside, I just walked slowly, looking down at my feet. And as I began to breathe easier, I wondered, who else stood here? Who else walked the same path that I was walking on the way to the gallows or the gas chamber? And then I began to wonder metaphorically if the spirits of those people who lived and died at Auschwitz-Birkenau still lingered there. And then something just said to me, I needed to photograph their ghosts. And so I began photographing ghosts. By using the other visitors at the camp and a long exposure, I turned the people into ghosts. But I was faced with two challenges. The first, each time I set up my camera on the tripod, people would move out of the way, not wanting to ruin my shot. They didn't understand that I needed them there. They needed to stand in proxy for those who lived and died at Auschwitz-Birkenau. So I had to quickly devise a technique. I would turn my back to the camera. I would play the part of the loud American, and I would speak very loudly into my cell phone. And then when the people wandered back in, I would use a remote shutter release to get the shot. The second challenge, I only had 45 minutes left at Auschwitz, and then I had 1 hour at Birkenau. Once being concerned about being disrespectful, I now found myself running from location to location, trying to document these images because I knew I would never be back. I could never go back. This is the only image I included a living person. And it had very specific meaning to me, this image, the living man amongst the ghosts. But I never tell people what an image means to me. I create from my vision, but the viewer, who has had completely different life experiences, interprets the image through their vision. And as I've asked people over the years how they interpret this image, I've heard over a dozen different interpretations from my own. And the gas chamber, which I could not enter. One of the great blessings this project has brought into my life is that I've been able to meet over 100 survivors. And like our World War II veterans, there are very, very few left. The Dallas Holocaust Museum had just built a new gallery, and they invited me to exhibit this work at the opening exhibition. And I attended opening night to meet and greet the visitors there. And I saw this woman, Edith Molnar, being pushed in a wheelchair from image to image. And as she got up to each image, she would crane her neck very far forward and closely examine it. And so I went up to her and I said, "Hi, my name is Cole, and these are my images." And Edith raised this crooked arthritic finger, and her hand was shaking as she pointed and said, "These are my images." Edith Molnar had been interned at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I couldn't fathom how she might have felt looking at these images. Lesson learned from this project: when I feel inspired, I must act now. There is no later. You may not feel the same way later. Conditions may be different. Act now. Another lesson learned: when I created these images, I did not know how to create ghosts. I remember seeing a couple of ghosts next to the angel Gabriel where people had stood still for a couple of seconds. So I had an idea. And so I had to learn several new skills and techniques to be able to execute my vision. But that's okay. That vision was a roadmap. It was burned into my memory. I knew what I wanted. The only thing left to do was the easy part, learn some new techniques. Lesson learned, when I have a vision, I will learn the skills needed to execute it. I don't need to have the skills in advance. Anyone can learn the skills. The real key is the vision. And another lesson learned. When I created this work, it was critically acclaimed. And I posted this image on Instagram and got very few likes. And then the next image after this one was this cheesy nude that had over 20 times as many likes. And that caught me off guard. And I thought, what does this mean? Maybe the image isn't very good. Here's the real lesson learned. More likes doesn't mean more better. External validation feels good for a few minutes, but it's no substitute for internal satisfaction. And now one more story, an embarrassing story. The Ghost of Auschwitz and Birkenau was popular, it was published, it was purchased, it was successful by any measure. And so my friends, my photographer friends, started contacting me and saying, look, you've got a successful project, you're in the spotlight, you need to follow up with another ghost series. Maybe the Ghost of 911 or the Ghosts of Manzanar, the Ghosts of whatever. And I said, no, I'm just not feeling it. And they said, no, look, you only get this opportunity once in your photographic life. You got to have another project and to ride the wave of success. And eventually I gave in and I agreed that I would do another project, the Ghosts of. And just at the same time, my wife and I had been watching The Tudors, that mini series about the kings and queens of ancient England. And I had always been watching the castles and they really fascinated with me. And so I decided I was going to do the Ghosts of Great Britain. So off I went to England with my 13-year-old daughter in tow with a white sheet. She was going to be my ghost. And we traveled all over England photographing ghosts at these different castle locations. And I got home and I processed the images and I sat on them for a bit and I realized I hated them. I just hated them. This project was contrived to take advantage of the popularity of the Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau series. There was no inspiration, there was no passion, there was no vision. And so the project failed. My wife said, maybe others will like it. It didn't matter. I didn't love it, so it could not be a success because my definition of success is to create images that I love, honest images that I love. And I ended up throwing them all away except for one. And this is my $10,000 image. And a lesson learned, create honest work. And I defined honest work as four things. First, it was my idea, not borrowed or stolen. It was created through my vision, not imitating someone else's idea. It is work that I created for myself with no thought about pleasing other people. And it is work that I love regardless of how others feel about it. And that's how I defined honest work. Okay, one bonus tip I want to give you. Where do you find the really great images? Well, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, Ireland, Alaska, Japan. The truth is, we speakers have been deceiving you. I don't think we intend to, but we send this subtle message that great locations create great images. And the truth is, you put the great into a great image, not the location. These are images that I created within 20 minutes of my home. I play this little game that if I brought back through a time machine all the great photographers and I brought them back to my hometown, would they find a great image? And I am certain that they would. Great images are everywhere. Summary: create from vision, create from passion, create from inspiration, create what you love, and love what you create. Thank you. I'm going to stop my share.
Thank you so very much. Because if everyone wants to unmute, they can.
We gained somebody. Who did we get? Is it Jim who joined us?
Jim was here. Pauline came in.
Pauline. Oh, hi, Pauline.
And Kara, and they're both guests.
Yeah, I was here.
Yeah. So I'm not the one to talk because I'll just go crazy. Anyone want to say something? Not a word.
It's not really a presentation where questions would be answered or asked, rather.
But it is a good. I really want to appreciate your nudges in the direction of just being honest in your photography and doing what you enjoy, which is what I do anyway. But it's good to be reminded it's okay.
Yeah, in the social media world, it's kind of, you find yourself slipping into wanting to create something that others like. And I love what Rick Rubin said. Another Rick Rubin quote paraphrased is that the audience comes last. I really believe that. He has found that when you create for yourself, you're doing the very best thing you can for an audience. So I'm a big believer in creating for ourselves, creating what we love.
Absolutely.
I really appreciated if you see something, stop. Because I was just sitting there thinking of all the images I missed because I didn't stop. And I wish I had.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for your time. It's lovely to be back.
Thank you.
It's great having you. I'd like to just plug your YouTube channel, which I enjoy very much. I check in every morning to see if there's a new one. And your workshop, I don't know if you'll continue doing your vision workshop, but I hope so. Because I think of anything, that is the one to do.
We just did one, and we'll be doing one in 2027.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So check out Cole's website. It's just, I find you remarkable. I truly find you remarkable. And I thank you very much for coming and speaking to our tiny group.
You bet. I love a small, comfortable group. Thank you for having me back. Maybe again in another year.
Yeah.
We'd love it. We'd love it. I know we will. We're very quiet. I'm the noisy one. So.
Thank you, Sonia. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you so much. Aloha. Have a wonderful vacation.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say good night to everybody else.
Right.
Good night.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.